Good news, booktubers, and welcome to a special Veterans Day edition of Grammaticus Books. Now, last year I did a Veterans Day edition where I talked about blood wings, a blood wing pinning ceremony at U.S. Army Air Assault School that happened back in 1990. I'll link that video down below. If you've got an interest, you can go check it out. And in that video, at the end of it, I said if I was still around and still doing videos on Booktube, which I am, that I would do another Veterans Day video this Veterans Day. So here we are. We're going to bring you guys a Veterans Day video of a MiG-23 Soviet fighter plane intercept of our P-3 reconnaissance aircraft that happened back in the late 1980s, approximately 12 miles off of the east coast of the Soviet Union, back when it was still the Soviet Union. So the way I'm going to structure the video here is I'm going to paint you guys sort of the back picture, give you guys the context in order to put this intercept into perspective. And then I actually have video of this intercept. I have about 2 one-minute clips of the Soviet MiG pilot coming up and intercepting our aircraft. And I'll put that into the video as well. And then after the videos are over, what I'll do is I'll talk about some other incidents that routinely occurred with these Soviet intercepts that would happen of our plane. And then I'll also talk about the Hainan Island incident in 2001 with the Chinese pilot and the VQ-1 P-3 that they collided with. And then finally, I'll go over a couple of books that are related to this topic, since this is Booktube. And I'll put all time hacks to all this down on the timeline below. If you want to skip forward to a certain part of it, you can easily find it on the timeline and just click on it and go to it. So that's the plan. Let's get into it. But before we talk about naval air crewman stories, before we talk Navy stories, we've got to get into the appropriate attire. And I shall do that now. There we go. So here we go. We got my enlisted naval air crewman candidate t-shirt. I've got 3 of these that are left. These were actually issued to me back in 1987 at Pensacola, Florida at Naval Air Crewman Candidate School. I don't know what they made these shirts out of. I call it the 3 Mile Island shirt. I wear these shirts quite a bit and they're still intact. Even the lettering is still on here and doing well. I think they were infused with some type of radioactive superpowers at 3 Mile Island and then issued out to us Naval Air Crewman Candidate recruits at that school. But let's put this MiG-23 intercept into context. Let's get on with the story. So we would fly a big 4-engine turboprop patrol plane that was originally designed as a sub-hunter. And the P-3 Charlies, the sweet P-3s, were just filled with sonobuoys and other sub-hunting gear. And they had an extended range in order to go out and fly over the oceans and try to locate enemy subs. The EP-3s, or the Ares birds as they were known, they just ripped out all that sub-hunting gear and then they packed it full of high-tech electronics and turned them into reconnaissance planes. And we would routinely fly reconnaissance missions all up and down what was known as the FEMD, or the Far Eastern Military District, with a major focus on the east coast of the Soviet Union. So we would take these patrol aircraft out of Japan, would fly them up to approximately 12 miles off of the coast of the Soviet Union, and then go up and down and do our thing. Why 12 miles? Because that is the international maritime border established by the UN that dictates everybody's borders that they're entitled to. So once you cross 12 miles into the coastline, then you're actually in Soviet territory. So we would stay just a little bit outside of that. And like I said, we flew these missions on a routine basis. And the Soviets also flew their reconnaissance missions in IL-38 Mays, which were very similar to our P-3s, off of the west coast of Japan. And these reconnaissance missions were so routine, in fact, that there was one time where the Soviet plane returning from its mission and our P-3 returning from our mission came within 20 feet of a head-on collision as they tried to return back to their respective bases. The pilot of the VQ-1 pilot of our P-3 saw that they were on a head-on collision with the Soviet plane and put the plane into an emergency dive. And they estimated that they missed colliding with the Soviet aircraft by approximately 20 feet as they went right by each other. He also reported that the Soviet pilot at no point ever altered course. He just maintained a straight course, and they engaged in this game of chicken. The Soviets were a different breed. They're still a different breed over there, and that it would be par for the course for a Soviet pilot. But we would fly these missions routinely. The Soviets, they had radar. These P-3 turboprops made a giant cross-section on a radar screen. They knew we were there. and they would send out fighter aircraft to intercept us and escort us to make sure that we didn't cross the border. There were three primary types of fighters that would come out and intercept us. MiG-23 Floggers, which were interceptor/dogfighter planes, and MiG-25 Foxbats and MiG-31 Foxhounds. The MiG-25s and the MiG-31s were larger aircraft that had two gigantic Tumansky engines attached to them. They were interceptors that were built in order to intercept American bombers trying to attempt bombing runs into the Soviet Union. So they were designed for high altitude and extremely high speed, and they in fact could actually break Mach 3. They were some of the fastest planes in the world at that time, just beasts of aircraft. But because they were built for speed, they couldn't just sit off of our wingtip. They couldn't fly that slow as our four-engine turboprop P3. So they would have to sort of circle around and just maintain a patrol on us in that manner. The MiG-23s, however, these were interceptor/dogfighters, and they had VGW, which stood for variable geometry wings. And that meant that they could take their wings and sweep them back in sort of this configuration, which allowed them to travel at faster speeds. And the MiG-23 had a single engine on it, and it could break about Mach 1. Or it could expand its wings out. It could rotate the wings out, the geometry on the wings, to have them straight out, which created a greater air surface for greater lift, which allowed the plane to have more maneuverability for a dogfight and to fly at slower speeds. So the MiG-23s could actually fly level next to us as we did our reconnaissance flights. And we, like I said, we would fly these missions routinely. The Soviets would routinely intercept us, and the method or the standard operating procedures of these intercepts is they would get about a half mile off of our wingtip and escort us until they ran low on fuel and had to go back. We were in a large patrol aircraft. We could stay out there for a very long time. They were in fighter jets, and they didn't have that long of a mission duration where their fuel would run out. So they would start off about a half mile out here, and then the next time we went out, they would come into a quarter mile, and the next time they would come out, it would be to a couple hundred yards, and then the next time we would be just wingtip to wingtip. And this video that I'm going to show you here today, I've got these two short, about 1 minute clips. This MiG-23 pilot is not just wingtip to wingtip with us, but he actually overlaps our wingtips twice during these videos. He's going to slide back over our wing, and the video is going to show him going over the wing. And most of that's going to be obscured by the engine nacelle of our propeller on that outboard wing. But you're going to see him go right back over it, and then he's going to come back across the wingtip and then peel off and break off. And these MiG-23s were always fully armed. Their typical complement of arsenal of armament was two AA-7 Apex medium-range missiles and two AA-8 Aphid short-range dogfighting infrared seeker missiles. And a lot of times what these pilots would do is they would come up next to us, they would roll their plane up like this so we could see all their missiles, and then roll back down, take their hands off of their flight controls, point over at the border, and then start miming a dogfight with their hands in the cockpit, letting us know that if we crossed the border, they were more than happy to blow us out of the sky, and they had the weapons to do it. And in fact, the Soviets actually did do this on one occasion, very sad occasion. Korean airline flight KAL-007 inadvertently strayed into Soviet airspace. This was just a big civilian airliner, and the Soviets went up and they shot it out of the sky, and they killed something like 163 people. So they were not kidding when they would mime these dogfights and say, if you cross the border, we're going to shoot you down. So this guy, this nutcase, he comes up, he goes up to wingtip to wingtip, he overlaps wingtips, and we actually wound up filing an International Incident at Sea report over this. These got filed quite a bit. This is how this would work, but I think in the 3 years that I was stationed out there, I think we had 2 occasions where a MiG-23 fighter pilot was little Looney Tunes and actually went over our wingtip. So when he's going over our wingtip, he's putting the tip of his wing about 3 to 4 feet off of the edge of our propeller. That's how close he comes to the edge of our propeller as he's rolling over our wingtip here. And it's a really interesting video. This is off of a VCR tape from the 1980s. It's a bit grainy. It looks a little bit like the Zapruder film, but it is a really good video. It's an interesting video, so check it out. So at this point, I'm just going to fade into the clips for the videos, for the intercepts of this MiG-23. go ahead and enjoy it, and we'll come back and talk a little bit. So that was the Intercept. I hope you guys enjoyed it. See what a nutcase this pilot was. And some of the other things that would happen routinely with these Soviet fighter jets and Soviet fighter pilots when they would come out is after they were done escorting us, when they were running low on gas and they had to go back and RTB, return to base, they would pull what we called a bump maneuver. And this was something that happened quite a bit. The planes would break off, they would come around in behind us, they would get up to a high rate of speed, go underneath our plane, and then pop up in front of us and deliberately put us into their jet wash. Now, if a MiG-23 Flogger did this, it wasn't that bad. It's a single engine plane, and you would get a lot of heavy turbulence. The plane would shake a lot. You'd lose a little bit of altitude. But these 4-engine P3s were very stable planes, and you could get the plane back under control. If a MiG-25 Foxbat or a MiG-31 Foxhound with the two gigantic Tumansky engines on it, they could propel it up to Mach 3. If you got bumped by one of those, it would immediately put you into a dive of 200 to 100 feet. You would just immediately lose that altitude, and the whole plane would have to be brought back under control. And those were pretty severe bumps. But again, this happened just frequently. It happened more often than it didn't happen during these intercepts, which leads me to the next topic, which is the Hainan Island incident in 2001. This is after I had rotated out. I was back in the civilian world. But VQ-1 was out. They were flying a mission off of China, and two Chinese fighter pilots, as they were RTBing, decided that they were going to fly and do a close pass underneath the plane. And the first pilot came in, and then he popped up in front of our P3, and he put the P3 into his plane's jet wash. Now, I don't know if his wingman realized he was going to do this. It was a very stupid thing to do, because when he popped up, the front plane popped up and put us into his jet wash. The P3 hit the turbulence, it lost altitude, and it dropped the P3 immediately into the path of his wingman who was falling behind him. And the wingman collided with the nose cone of the P3 aircraft. It destroyed the Chinese fighter plane, killed the Chinese fighter pilot, and it ripped the entire front off of the P3. So the nose cone is gone, and the pilot is now trying to fly a plane that's missing a nose cone. And you can imagine just the stress and the difficulty of trying to pilot an airplane that no longer has a front nose cone on it. Thankfully, the pilot, through a tremendous amount of courage and skill, was able to land the plane safely on Hainan Island, and 10 days later, the crew was returned to the United States. But that was kind of the dangerous things that could happen in these incidents back there in the 1980s. And these things happen all the time. They happened on a routine basis. But that's the story of these intercepts. I hope you enjoyed it. I am going to sort of rotate into some books and try to bring this back a little bit into the Booktube realm. And back when I was in there in Naval Air Facility, Japan, stationed over there, I and a lot of guys would collect these Arco books. These were put out by Arco Press, and they were little guides to various different types of military forces. This one here is modern fighters. These were very prevalent in the 1980s, the late 1980s. You could go into a Barnes & Noble or a Borders bookstore, and they would have tons of these things, and they sold like hotcakes. And they were basically just little informational booklets on all the different types of aircraft or whatever military genre it was focused on. And it would give you a down and dirty of the equipment and a nice little photograph of it. And they were great books to have, particularly from our perspective, because we worked in SCIFs. SCIF is SCIF, it's an acronym. It stands for Secure Intelligence Facility, and you could not take anything in or out of a SCIF, or else you were going to find yourself shipped off to Fort Leavenworth, where for the next 10 years you were going to make big rocks into little rocks. So we could have books like this one right here, which I did, on the modern Soviet Air Force, that were not classified, that you could have in your barracks room and pick up and look at it as a sort of a field guide and an educational booklet about all the different Soviet fighter planes. And here's a MiG-23, for instance, right there. And on page 70 of this, here you've got the overview page for the MiG-23 Flogger. And here you can see that variable geometry wing that I was talking about. Right there, you've got it in the swept back position for high speed, and then they show it deployed out for maneuvers, for dogfighting maneuvers, or for flying at lower speeds, or that would also be for takeoff and landing. So you get a good look there at a MiG-23. And that, in fact, is a MiG-23 on the front with a head-on view of it. The MiG-23 was probably the most ubiquitous fighter in the Soviet arsenal at that time. It wasn't a particularly good fighter. It was a third-generation fighter. It was totally outclassed by anything in the U.S. arsenal. But on paper, it looked good. But in actuality, this thing would have gotten blown out of the sky in about 10 seconds flat in any type of a dogfight with a U.S. aircraft. Now over here, I've got a souvenir program from 1990 at the Naval Air Facility, Atsugi, Japan. Every year they would open up the base for an air show, and all the Japanese civilians and nationals could come onto the base, and they would come on by the tens of thousands, and they would put on an air show for the Japanese civilians, and they would also put out a little pamphlet like this one right here. And it would cover the whole air wing that was stationed there for the USS Midway. There it is CVW-5, or Carrier Air Wing number 5, and all the patches of the squadrons. And then it would give you a little down and dirty on all the different types of planes that were assigned to the air wing in the USS Nimitz, or not the USS Nimitz, the USS Midway CV-41. There's an A-6 bomber over there, an E-2C Hawkeye, and it's in English and Japanese. And then you've got a EA-6B Prowler over here, which I also had the privilege to fly in. And then right here down at the bottom, you've got our EP-3 reconnaissance bird, the Ares. And I still got a hold of this here from 1990. Pretty good stuff. But that's it. That is my, that thing. It just doesn't want to stay up there. Stay. That's it. That's our Veterans Day video here for 2024. Last year, I said I was going to do a Veterans Day video this year on the Buddha Pane, which was a wing pinning ceremony of the United States Navy's, an unofficial one that had its roots in Vietnam, and it had gone by the wayside by the mid-1980s by the time I got out to Atsugi. But one night in 1989, my new barracks mate who had just earned his wings, we were on deployment to Adak Island, and he said he wanted to get the Buddha Pane. The reason the Buddha Pane had faded into obscurity is because it was so heinous and so dangerous that it just by unspoken agreement, nobody was going to do it anymore. Until Steve Joe, and why we called him Steve Joe is a whole nother story, until Steve Joe decided he wanted to get it in the enlisted club of the Air Force Base on Adak Island one night in 1989, and he in fact did get the Buddha Pane. However, my wife advises me that telling that story on Booktube, on YouTube, is probably a very bad idea. And on reflection, she's probably right. She usually is right. Those stories, and there are so many stories, but those stories are best not told in mixed company, and best told when the sun isn't shining and after copious amounts of alcohol. But I mean, it was to sum up, it was the 1980s. We were enlisted naval air crewmen. It was in the Far East, and things were just different. But anyway, I might still do another Veterans Day video here on Friday if I have the time. Still haven't decided what I would do it on. But it's time to wrap this one up, and I'm going to wrap it up by saying take care, be safe. Thank you for your service if you're a vet and you're watching the video here today, and I'll catch you guys next time.